He kōna e purangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
Tyler James Lindsay lives near Cambridge, and it was late one night, so late that it was actually morning, that he was driving a milk tanker along a small backcountry Waikato road.
There just happened to be a really big, fat, fluffy bird sitting in the middle of the road that was definitely not supposed to be there.
Did you know straight away what you were looking at?
I had a fair idea. I wasn't 100% sure, but once got a little bit closer to it and I seen it waddle off, I had a fair idea it was a kākāpō.
Kia ora, no mai haramai ki te ao hurihanga. Hello and welcome to Our Changing World. Ko Claire Kincannon tēnei. Just imagine it. You're driving slowly in the darkness, pull around a slight bend, and there it is, a kākāpō, parrot of the night.
Yeah, just a big green bird, just in the middle of the road looking straight at my lights. I think it was rather confused.
Tyler's into native birds, so he was well aware that kākāpō had been released into Sanctuary Mountain Maungatautari 6 months earlier. The person manning the Doc 24/7 hotline at the time was maybe less up to speed, though in her defence, it was about 2 a.m.
To start with, she thought that I was pretty much full of crap. She was like, there's no kākāpō up there. You definitely, unless you're down south, you definitely haven't seen one. And then I mentioned about the Maungatautari Reserve and all that, which she actually didn't really know about. And then from there, obviously, she gave me an email address to send, so I could send an email on that. And yes, and then the next day, obviously, I sent the email.
Which would have quickly made its way to Dan Howie.
Thankfully for us, he reported it, and of course it came through to our team, and we were able to run out there and retrieve that bird. And, you know, so, such an incredible interaction that he saw this bird out there in the middle of the road, no less, which is absolutely terrifying as kākāpō ranger.
Dan is super passionate about his role and feels really privileged to work with these birds, these manu. But it's probably fair to say that it's not been a stress-free year in the job.
It's still something that comes with a high level of anxiety when I think we may have a bird outside of the sanctuary. You know, it's my role as kākāpō ranger, and our job as a team as kaitiaki of these precious taonga that have been lent to us from Ngāi Tahu to look after these birds, and we take that duty very seriously. So to have birds outside the sanctuary made us somewhat anxious, but it also steels your resolve. You have to find a solution, and you have to find this bird as rapidly as possible. And so, you know, you work very hard to make sure that happens.
Elwyn, the escapee in this case, was found about 1 kilometre from where Tyler spotted him and returned to the sanctuary, thankfully unscathed. He would go on to escape again, which triggered the 2 strikes and you're out policy. In May, he was given a brand new home on Fiordland's coal island, Te Puka. And he's not the only kākāpō to have been shown the red card. Now, the people I spoke to for this episode continually emphasised that releasing these birds into Sanctuary Mountain Maungatautari was always being done on a trial basis, and that the trial is ongoing. But a year on, and several kākāpō escapades later, what's been learned, and where to next?
All right, kia ora. Before we start the ceremony and the ritual of releasing these beautiful taonga into the ngahere, just a couple of things.
It's just over a year ago, July 19th, 2023. 4 male kākāpō are being released into Sanctuary Mountain Maungatautari, a 3,400 hectare fenced, predator-free forested area in the Waikato, about an hour south of Kirikiriroa, Hamilton. It's been 4 decades since these manu were last on Te Ika Maui, the North Island.
We had quite a crowd of people for the release. We had a lot of school children there, so local iwi, local school children. And the thing was, when we pulled the kākāpō from its box and basically to put it into a bag to transfer it, and everyone saw the kākāpō for the first time, and there was this collective intake of breath. Everyone just went, It was completely unscripted. It just really showed that the impact that these birds have.
This is Andrew.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Andrew Digby aho, ko te kaitohu tohu pūteo o kākāpō me tākehei o te papa atawhai e mahi ana. So I'm Andrew Digby, and I'm the science advisor for kākāpō and tākehei at te papa atawhai, the Department of Conservation.
Andrew has been on the kākāpō recovery team for about a decade. When he started, there were around 120 birds. Now, there are 247.
So we're kind of just about doubled in that time. We've had these 3 really big breeding seasons, which has done wonders for the kākāpō population.
Which, of course, is awesome. At one stage, there were only 51 kākāpō left in the entire world. And that was the challenge, prevent them from going extinct. There's obviously still a long way to go in terms of numbers, but the successful breeding seasons has meant they now have a new challenge. Where to keep them all? How much space does a kākāpō need?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that's something that we're working out. Typically, in some of the early habitat, in like Fiordland and Rakiura, they might have had 50 hectares per individual. But we know that on some of our islands currently, like Whenua, they can get down to about 15 hectares per kākāpō. So it kind of varies, round about that, sort of round about 20 to 30 hectares per kākāpō is what we think of, but it's very much habitat dependent.
And when you run out of space, what do you push up against? Is it like the lack of food to share, or do they start squabbling, or, what's the issue when you've got too many kākāpō in one place?
It's both of those things. So one of the issues that we have is lack of suitable nesting habitat for females, or a sufficient habitat for them to be able to support offspring. So they need to be able to have enough rimu trees, for example, to be able to feed their young. And the other thing that happens is that the males fight. So when they're up at their display sites or their track and bowl systems, they'll fight amongst each other. They will kill each other sometimes. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen too often. But we do have this issue that we don't actually know what's normal with kākāpō. So still in the learning phase for what's optimal.
So the southern predator-free offshore islands that kākāpō have been breeding on are getting kind of full. And another breeding season is on the horizon.
We think it's probably going to be 2026. So we'll kind of have nesting January 2026. That's our initial prediction. We base that on temperature differences between one year and the next. And it's looking like 2026 could be quite a significant year for kākāpō.
So they need new kākāpō habitat. It must be predator-free. And while the majority of the kākāpō live in the deep south right now, in the rohe of Ngaitahu, they used to be far more widespread across both islands. Here's Dan.
We have really strong evidence that they were here in the Waikato. Midden studies from around Waitomo have shown that kākāpō were present in part of the diet here in the Waikato, and also coprolite studies have shown that they're present here. So we know they were here. The population of kākāpō that we have left have obviously, lived for many generations in the far south. So while they're the same species as the birds that would have been present here in the North Island, they have adapted to that different environment. And so, it will be a change for the birds who come to Maungatautari. But they're very clever birds, and they eat a wide variety of vegetation. And from what we are seeing at Maungatautari, they are eating well on the Maunga. They have adapted to the new food resource they have on the mountain, but we need to know more about exactly how well they're doing that and what they are eating and how they're using that habitat.
This trial, introducing kākāpō to Sanctuary Mountain Maungatautari, has been about a decade in the making. It's not as if the birds were just plonked in there to see what happened. There was a lot of relationship building, planning, training and preparation beforehand. First, the sanctuary itself had to be modified. Here's Andrew.
We actually had a few trials down on Whenua to understand kākāpō in a fence space. We'd had kākāpō in small enclosures before, but never anything on that scale with that type of fence. So we wanted to understand, would kākāpō climb out of that fence? Because these fence sanctuaries were designed to keep pest animals out. They weren't designed to keep anything in. So we'd never had this situation before of how to keep something in there. And they've actually been built to allow things to climb out. We want, say, for example, if a weasel gets in, we want it to be able to get out easily enough. So they were built with a hood on the outside, but not on the inside, for example. So they were the trials that we did, was to understand, could kākāpō climb that fence? And if so, what would we do about it? So the design we came up with actually was a baffle on the inside of the fence, basically a tin barrier. And our trials showed that kākāpō would not climb that barrier.
The fence at Maungatautari is 47 kilometres long. It took about 6 months across the summer of 2022/23 and about $900,000 to add the baffle. Meanwhile, Dan linked up with the kākāpō recovery team to get some training.
2 years ago now, I was given the privilege of going to Pukenui, Anchor Island, which is one of the southern breeding islands where the main kākāpō population is kept. And I spent 2 weeks extensively training with the team down there. I learnt a lot around tracking kākāpō and handling kākāpō, how to do health checks, how to do transmitter changes and things like that.
Plus, when the birds arrived, they had initial on-site support from the kākāpō recovery team. And there were other preparations underway too.
Oh, look, that was just an amazing opportunity for learning again. The ultimate was, or is rather, of course, is the learnings from the iwi to iwi interaction over this taonga species. Kia ora tātou, ko Tāne Davis tōku ingoa, Turunanga o Naitahu representative on the kākāpō recovery group. Kia ora.
It wasn't the first time the kākāpō have been moved from the Naitahu rohe. There are a few on Hoturu o Toi, Little Barrier Island, in a trial there, but this transfer of a taonga species and sharing of knowledge with Waikato iwi and hapu was a vitally important part of the kaupapa.
It was about how do we make this happen, because we both do have our own tikanga values as iwi. We have our mana iwi values as iwi, and what is the kawa? How do we do these things, you know? And my mind sort of set back way back in time before colonisation. Maybe our people did do this in exchanging various manu, but of course there would have been a food source. So in this case, these manu were being exchanged alive instead of back in the day when they were being exchanged, not so alive, but as a kai source, I guess you could say. So that to me was extremely special in those learnings and how we done that with the receiving iwi or tainu and the hapu.
Finally, with all preparations complete, there's a blessing and karakia and the 4 birds are released. And at first, everything was great.
And those 4 males were relatively stable in the first 3 months, as in they settled into fairly regular territories and were, fairly easy to manage in those first few months. So with that in mind, another 6 males were introduced to Maungatautari in September of last year. So the total was 10 by September of 2023.
But this is when things started to go awry.
They began to roam quite widely across the Maunga. Rather than being a little bit more settled into sort of fairly regular territories, we saw a lot of movement from these individuals, and not just from the additional six that were introduced, but also from some of the original 4 that came in the first translocation in July. That was really interesting behaviour. It was a little bit unexpected for us. Well, unexpected is not the right word, but it was a little bit outside of our experience from the previous 4. And then in October of that year, we had our first kākāpō leave the sanctuary, and that was a real learning for us. That was Tautahi, and it appears that he left at the west side of the Maunga and went on a bit of an adventure from that side of the Maunga, circumnavigating towards the south. And so that was quite the experience for us, and a real shock. We had not picked up on him for a couple of days, so we made a concerted effort to have a look for him. And when one of our rangers was travelling outside the sanctuary in a ute with what's called a non-directional aerial, so an aerial stuck to the top of the roof, which is just listening very broadly for radio signals, and he was shocked when he picked up a beep in an area where we were not expecting to pick up a beep. So it was all hands on deck, and we all rushed to that area, and were able to track down Tautahi, and he was up high on this rock formation in amongst a bunch of fallen pine, which was completely unexpected. But he was retrieved happily and healthy and returned to the sanctuary without injury safely. But yeah, it was a real shock and a real learning for us when that happened. And those escapades continued. We saw a real increase in the number of kākāpō leaving as the summer progressed.
And they had to introduce some rules. One escape was a yellow card. A second, and they were shipped back down south.
To be frank, there is a fair amount of danger for these birds beyond the safety of that sanctuary fence. You know, the farmland which they were crossing and have crossed involves things like livestock and farm dogs. There are, traps on these farms, things to control possums and the like. The support we've had from the community, I've spent a lot of time, knocking on our neighbouring landowners' doors at all hours of the day and night to say, "Oh, hi, I think we may have a kākāpō on your land. Is it okay if I come across your land and hunt this bird down?" And the support from the community has been overwhelmingly positive, both from our neighbouring landowners, farmers and things, but also from iwi and the local Māori community has been great in supporting us in that space.
I couldn't help but think how frustrating this must have been to have this massive, beautifully forested, predator-free area with this nice high point of the mountain close to the centre. You would think perfect as a spot for a kākāpō to boom from. And then for them to ignore all that and head towards the fence. But maybe I'm looking at it in the wrong way, not in a trial way. Because though Dan says it's been stressful for him and others, with every escape, with every season, they're learning more about how kākāpō behave around all the new things they're encountering. Here's Andrew.
It's the why for me that's most important and most interesting. And when you're up there and you see this beautiful forest, and then there's a fence, and outside it is just grass. It's like, as a kākāpō, why would you do that? And that's one of the things that we've been working to understand. And there definitely does seem to be some sort of temporal aspect to it. So they're not all just moving all the time. They're kind of at certain times of the year, it seems like they're moving more. So it may be some sort of breeding behavior which is triggering them to do that. And they're spending quite a lot of time on the fence, which is interesting to us. And we don't quite know why, whether they're actually trying to get out. But it's from our observations, it seems like they're not necessarily trying to get out over the fence. But it may be that some of the habitat there they quite like. And one thing we've picked up on, for example, is that they seem to really like blackberry. They're spending a lot of time in blackberry. And we had one individual which probably spent 2 months in a single blackberry patch, which we don't see that sort of behavior in anywhere else so far. And we haven't actually had kākāpō with blackberry before. Like, as far as I know, kākāpō have never seen blackberry. So they actually seem to be really keen on it. So it might be some sort of interesting quirk like that as well. Actually, they just like some of the habitat near the fence and they accidentally climb over sometimes without actually meaning to. We'd certainly know the first kākāpō that escaped spent quite a bit of time trying to get back in. So that was interesting. But other birds that have escaped have kind of made a beeline and headed straight away from the sanctuary too. So yeah, there's not a clear, consistent picture.
Unfortunately, you can't ask a kākāpō why it's choosing to boof over a fence instead of staying in the nicely forested, safe sanctuary. Tane has his own opinions, based on his years of interaction with the manu.
Kākāpō, they see a fence, so it's kind of like, well, okay, so maybe that's in their mind to challenge it. The birds come from islands, so no fence. The fence is actually the foreshore and the moana, the water. So that keeps them on the island. That is the difference. And yeah, there is a difference in the ngahere, absolutely. So they're all, I guess you could say, generate inquisitiveness. But it certainly is an interesting outcome when the birds start challenging the fence line. But of course, they're great at climbing. That's something that we've always known about them. And of course, overhanging branches, if this is the case at the sanctuary, which I think we've learned from, they will crawl up and then go over the fence line.
From the fence trials they've conducted within Maungatautari, this is the leading hypothesis for what's going on. It doesn't appear that they can climb the baffle fence itself, but they've captured video footage of kākāpō using their beaks and claws to clamber along overhanging vegetation, and then using their body weight to bend the branches and kind of lower themselves over the side of the fence. It's actually a really neat trick. But of course, it'll mean more work for Dan and the Maungatautari team, who now have to add vegetation clearing near the fence to their long list of regular jobs. There are only 3 kākāpō remaining now in the sanctuary: Bunker, Teatanga and Tautahi, who, despite being the first to escape, now seems to have settled down. It's not that every other bird got the red card. It was also decided to reduce the numbers down so that the monitoring load is feasible. Dan sent me some voice notes from his day-to-day activities in the forest.
Main piece of work we do with kākāpō here at Maungatautari is to locate them each day. So this involves walking through the bush, carrying a yagi and a TRA. Yagi is effectively a handheld aerial and TRA to radio receiver, and the radio receiver picks up on radio pulse put out by a backpack transmitter worn on each kākāpō. By taking a bearing of the direction of the strongest signal, we're able to get a picture of each kākāpō's location. As you might be able to hear, Bunker is fairly close to me today. As well as locating Bunker, I'll also carry out supplementary feeding, which involves giving him pellets 3 times a week at a small hopper here in the bush. And this supplementary feeding helps our team anchor Bunker in a location here in the forest interior, and also makes keeping an eye on him much easier.
The idea is that this feeding will be short-term. As you heard, every kākāpō wears a transmitter, and so that's a large part of Dan's job, driving the perimeter or bush bashing around the sanctuary, following the signals to locate different kākāpō. But now they're also trialling new GPS tags on the birds.
So here we are with tautahi in hand. Tautahi gave us the slip a couple of times before my colleague Craig and I managed to locate him in a small tree fall. Craig is sitting beside me here with Tautahi on his lap, who's fairly calm today. So Craig is able to hold him in position just with his hands resting on top of his claws. I'm going to do a quick health check on Tautahi, so that involves checking the fit of his transmitter. We'll check Tautahi's weight, and we'll check on things such as his eye clarity, how full his crop is, and making sure things like his legs and claws are still functioning totally fine. Once we've done a quick health check, we'll change over the GPS tag, which is fitted to Tautahi. These OrniTrack GPS tags have been a real boon for our team in helping us track birds each day and be sure of their location. Once we've done this changeover, we're just going to let Tautahi go to the bush just beside us here, and in classic Tautahi style, I imagine he'll do a very slow, stealthy escape.
Now, this habitat trial is very much focused on the well-being of the manu, but it's also the first time that kākāpō are in a place that we, Joe Public, can also be in. And this matters, says Tane.
That overall sense of kākāpō being on the maunga, I think really does boost the mana of the people, absolutely. Even if they don't get to see it, it's the knowing that it's there. You don't necessarily have to go and see the manu or get that. Well, unfortunately, at times you won't get to see the manu because of its colouring and so forth as it blends into the ngāhere. But at the same time, of course, the sanctuary is different from a zoo. It's about knowing the species is there. You don't actually have to, will get the opportunity to see it. Because if you think about it, way back in so many years ago, we nearly lost them to where they weren't there at all.
They blend in and they're only active at night. So yeah, chances of seeing them are very low. But Dan recalls one time some visitors got a bit lucky.
Myself and some colleagues were conducting a health check on a bird high on the maunga on one of our walking trails, and then a family happened to just be walking along this track as we caught this bird, and he was right there on the walking track, and we were conducting our work, and they just happened to be walking past. And so this family, and they were all keen bird watchers, were able to stand back and watch and actually see a kākāpō, relatively up close while we did our work. And, that was just such a huge buzz for them, way to tick off pretty much the rarest bird you could possibly tick off on your bird watching list just by coming to Maungatautari and being in the right place at the right time.
So what's next for kākāpō in Maungatautari? The thought was that one day they could breed here. So far, it's only been males introduced as part of the trial, those that have been deemed lower value breeding-wise. Sorry, guys. Here's Dr. Andrew Digby.
We're keen to commit to this trial basically to learn more about it, because we know we've just had a year and we've still got a lot more that we want to find out. We've just recently done a fence trial up there to understand how they might be escaping. That's a really important learning for us. We really want to try and look what happens over time. Maybe these birds will settle down a lot more with time, or maybe they will continue to have these seasonal movements. So that's kind of really important information that we want to learn, plus, what they're eating and how they go in general within a fence sanctuary, because the fence sanctuaries are important for kākāpō. They could still play a pretty important role into the future. So we really want to understand, how they can support a kākāpō population and how kākāpō do at Maungatautari too. So we're committed to continuing this trial just with a smaller number of individuals.
Does the hope still exist that there could be a breeding population within a fenced eco-sanctuary?
Yeah, we would like that. Yes, we think fence sanctuaries still have a role to play. There's the goal of predator-free 2050 and having vast areas unfenced, but I think fence sanctuaries have got an important, at least interim role in that. And one of the issues that we have with kākāpō is that they need quite a lot of space. So a lot of the fence sanctuaries, say for example, Zealandia, an amazing fence sanctuary, but it's too small to keep a population of kākāpō. You could only really get a few kākāpō there, and it's not a viable population. But with Maungatautari, it's so big that you could easily have a breeding population of kākāpō there in terms of space. So if we can keep them in, and if they show signs of breeding behaviour, then it's certainly potential. And any other large fence sanctuary as well, as long as it's big enough. And we could have kākāpō there.
And what about kākāpō in general? With that breeding season predicted for 2026, the newest habitat trial is now happening on Coal Island, Te Pukahereka. Elwyn, he who played chicken with a milk tanker, is yet again a pioneer. But still more habitat is needed. And Tane has a grand idea of where that could be.
To the future, my thoughts are, in regards to, we need to obviously be looking at more habitat, pest-free habitat. Absolutely, because kākāpō is so vulnerable to pests. And hence, kākāpō going to Maungatautari. But there are other opportunities out there, and I'll just touch on a big island that's across from Fauveau Strait from Murihiku, and there's Rakiura. That's the taonga's kāinga, the hōkāinga. That's where some of these birds have come from. We've got some really good initiative planning going on at the moment in regards to Rakiura becoming pest-free. So once that happens, hopefully it's soon, and we can return those taonga back to their home.
Thanks to Tyler Lindsay, Dan Howie, Dr. Andrew Digby, and Tane Davis. And actually, Andrew and I had quite a long chat about all things kākāpō. I'm going to drop that full interview into the podcast feed as a bonus episode, so keep an eye out for that. Ko Claire Kanana ho, te kaiho tū o tēnei hōtaka, I āwhina mai a Liz Garton, rawa ko Ellen Rikers. I produced this episode with help from Liz and Ellen. Sound engineering was by William Saunders, and Liz Garton is executive producer of Our Changing World. This episode was made with the help of Otago Access Radio. If you've got a road trip coming up, I've got a podcast recommendation for you. The 3rd season of Know My Town is out now. Join the wonderful Justine Murray as she travels around Aotearoa to learn about the stories behind our place names. Tēnā koe I whakarongo mai. Thanks so much for listening. Ko Claire Kanana ho. Have a great week. Kia pai, the wiki.